Hello, everybody, and welcome to Whammy Analyzes. I'm your host, Whammy, and on this week's review, we'll be taking a look at the spring 2020 anime Wave Listen to Me. And if you're wondering why I'm talking like this, it's because in honor of the show's focus on radio, I decided to pull out my audio equipment and record this episode like a radio program. See, for about 6 years or so, I used to do a radio show at my graduate school's campus radio, which is a big part of why I was attracted to this show in the first place. While that show was a political talk show, and therefore not quite in the genre that is performed in the anime, well, I was still a little nostalgic, and this felt like the best way to vent it out. The result of this is that the method of distributing this review will be slightly different from the usual written blog post. Like my old radio show and the program in the anime, rather than having a detailed script of everything I'll say, I'll have some key notes of the highlights I want to hit and allow for a little more improv work in between. This does mean that outside of this introduction section, I won't have a dedicated transcript as it's just me doing the show and I don't have anybody do transcription work. But I'll make the notes available so that those of you who have auditory issues will have at least a general guideline and still get the general thoughts I have about the show. So let's get that on-air sign turned on as we dig into exactly why you should be tuning in to Wave Listen to Me. And in a bit of a change of pace, I want to start with the production quality. Because being centered on radio, the voice performances of the characters are probably the highlight of the show, especially the performances for the main lead, Minare Koda. Voiced by Riho Sugiyama in the Japanese and Terry Dottie in the English version, which I actually watched the English version as part of my rewatch because I was curious. And I have to say that I think both performers give a very good performance. In fact, in the 2020 Crunchyroll Awards, I actually voted for Riho in particular as Best VA Performance of the Year. Unfortunately, she didn't win. Makes sense, the show wasn't exactly as big as the actual winner for that year, which the voice actor for Suguru from the ReZero series. And I feel really bad that I can't put a clip of the character in this audio recording because I don't want to deal with YouTube's copyright stuff. So I'll put it in the description of the video here and in the blog post version of this. A clip from a scene that, or a link to a Tumblr post where somebody has a video clip because there's no YouTube post that I could find of it. And it's a scene from about midway through where she is doing a radio drama about murdering her ex, basically, while her actual ex is about to be murdered by someone. So warnings for all of that. And but we'll get to that later. But the key thing is, as the show itself notes, Minare's voice is meant to be somewhat abrasive in an endearing way. It's not, soothe and calming like a normal radio. It's aggressive. And the speaking style is meant to be very fast-paced while not stumbling over the words. In fact, what brings her into the world of radio is basically going on a drunken rant one night while the director of the radio station is there, and that she does the rant without ever stumbling over her words. The result is something with a very fast-paced comedic timing that is just an entertaining thing to listen to. If you're someone who likes kind of a little bit ranty comedy that can occasionally go into some weird directions, as she has quite the imagination. And I think both of the performers, the English or Japanese, and I think because of the nature of this series, I think listening it into a language that you are able to understand primarily auditory is a big plus. So watch whatever version you're fine with on. And it gives this really, like I said, strong energy to the character that is fun to listen to. And I think part of the attraction to that for me is if you're listening to this, you can tell I'm a very slow, deliberate speaker. So I always tend to enjoy characters who can do sort of the faster paced things. So that said, she's not the only performance that's fun. I particularly like Shinshu Fui in the Japanese and Christopher Sabalit in the English as the director of the radio station Kanetsugu Matao, who is an older man who's kind of got a devilish charisma to him. Like he's a guy who's betting on a drunk he met in a bar once to be the next big radio star. So, he's got like that mixture of grizzled veteran and, like I said, that devilish charm that he knows something that she doesn't and is going to use that knowledge to advance her career. Like I said, it's an interesting character. And I think both of those guys play the performance as well. Do play the performances very well. And I'm going to keep little mistakes like that in because that's part of the fun of a quote-unquote live radio program. Studio Sunrise is the one responsible for the animation. And it's a generally good quality production. It looks very nice. It's not anything I would say to necessarily write home about either. It's not, it's a slice of life romantic, not romantic, it's a slice of life drama type show. So it's functional, I guess is the word I would put it. And unfortunately, for as much as I watch animation, I am not particularly knowledgeable on the technical aspects to it. So at the very least, it's nice to look at, but if you actually weren't watching the video, I think you would still be fine. Because like I said, the key experience is the voice acting, I think, and the radio dramas and that nature. Those are the highlights of the show. And I think it plays to the fact that it is about radio, that you could probably watch those segments without the visuals and still get enjoyment out of it. Which is where I think is a good time for us to move away from that into what is the show actually about. Or just the general tones and stuff like that. And I think the best way to describe it is that the opening scene is an in media res of Minari doing the show, where she's presented as being up at a mountain at 3 a.m. in the morning, fighting a bear while doing questions from listeners. The McElroys would kill to have the type of bits that she apparently does on a regular basis in this show. Now, obviously, she's not actually fighting a bear, though I think I read that in the manga she does legitimately do it at one point, and this is a homage to that, but I've not read the manga, so I can't confirm for sure. And like I said, there's just something very odd watching that opening scene. I had to do a double take when I first watched the show, where you're just watching this woman wrestling a bear while talking about how reading this sumo wrestler's blog will change your life as advice that she's giving to the listeners. And yeah, it was a weird introduction, but I think it is the best way to describe the tone of this show. And like I said, I think watching that scene or the scene I clip should give you enough of a sense of whether the show's for you. That's why this isn't a 3-episode rule thing. It's like, you watch those clips, you're going to get what the highlights of the show are in terms of these radio productions. That should give you the sense of what you want. But bringing it into the broader plot line, the show centers around Minari Koda, who starts off as a part-time curry shop worker, working basically contingency. Like, a big part of the show is the instability of the job, who ends up in the world of radio as, like I said, she rants to the director about her ex-boyfriend, who had recently run off with a bunch of money of hers and just disappeared off the face of the earth. And he ends up recording her conversation under dubious consent and plays it on the air. And to just sort of emphasize what I mean by like the devilish planning on his end, he mentions that he had known that she worked at a restaurant that played their show, because I guess he had been to the restaurant before, and purposely made sure to air it during the times that he was sure she'd be working there, so she would get upset and come to the radio station so he could then put her on air live. Yeah, like I said, it's a weird show, but the dynamic between her and the director is fun because he's really pushy about, you can do this, while also justifying the acting in a way that I get why she's a little skeeved out by him. So it is an interesting dynamic in that sense. And this just all cascades into the sort of a life-changing series of events where Minari is waffling between wanting to be dedicated to radio because she's caught the bug, and I get that. I did my radio show initially just as a part of an application for a grant where they needed, how are you going to distribute the product of your research and the research you're doing? It's like, I'm going to be doing I'm going to work on with the radio station. And there I go. I ended up getting a radio show at first it was at 4 a.m. and then 5 a.m. and then eventually they did give me a better slot of 6 a.m. and which is still better than her 3 in the morning. And I get that bug and that desire. I mean, that's why I pulled out my audio equipment to do this programming for this review. But, it's also still a local radio station. It wasn't exactly the best pay, so she's struggling with, work and rent, and eventually has to move in with one of the people from the radio station. So it is a very much in that genre. When I started watching the show, I thought it would be of that, like, behind-the-scenes production show, like Shirobako or something like that. It's not. It is a more of that, coming of age, listless millennial who doesn't know what to do with her life, finding a passion in what she thought was a dying medium, and sort of the magic of live radio interaction and radio audiences. And that sounds very similar to how we would probably talk about streamers and podcasters and stuff like that in a more modern media sense, really. Which is a very interesting, I think it's actually an interesting comparison to make, the extent to which streamers and stuff like that seem to have kind of inherited sort of the sentimentality of radio in that sense, more than, say, television. So you got all of this, and like I said, and they throw in things to really heighten the drama at times, like, your ex-boyfriend almost gets murdered by his current girlfriend, which does come back. It's not a one-off thing. There's a whole episode dedicated in the aftermath about that. And then you get like the two-parter that involves him having to perform an exorcism in her old neighbor's house because it's dripping blood from his ceiling. And I'm not going to explain much of the details for that because I want to give you guys something to go watch for the show yourself. But in a weird sense, though, I think it contributes to the theme because part of what happens in these is she's experiencing sort of just the weirdness of real life and can use that. It's content generation. You're sort of like this. We're getting to see the wacky stories that people who go into media then use to generate content on their show. And, it's an interesting and fun thing, especially because Minari has a very sarcastic personality who recognizes a lot of the stuff she's getting involved in is weird, but she can't escape from it either. She's inadvertently drawn to it despite also recognizing, like, what the hell is going on? And it makes for just this interesting dynamic. And one of the other, and I've already mentioned that I really like her dynamic with the director, but the other character whose dynamic I enjoy with her is her relationship with Nizuho Nanba, who's voiced by Manaka Iwami in the Japanese and Tia Ballard in the English. Now, she's a side character, but she introduces a lot of sunshine into the cast, because a lot of the cast does tend to be a little dreary, like one of the older writers who's gone for decades without any real recognition in the broader community and stuff like that. No, she's still kind of young and passionate and is determined to one day be a producer and get to run things on her own because she really loves and wants to work in radio. And as the assistant director and the person Minari moves in with, she ends up becoming Minari's biggest supporter and encouraging her to push her because she feels like Minari lacks, I think, any real strong sense of shame and is perfectly happy to be, or she has shame. She admits that a lot of stuff she says she regrets immediately afterwards, but she's willing to say it anyway. And that's something that Nizuho admires. And also, while I don't usually talk about shipping too much in a lot of this stuff, I do have to say I kind of ship her and Minari together, just because, and I think like Minari herself, especially when I was rewatching it in the English, doesn't seem to be against the idea. And at the very least, I like their dynamic a lot more than the other, like, more explicitly romantic coded thing, or at least a one-sided romantic thing, with, I think, the character that kind of slows the show down the most, which is Chuya Nakahara, played by Masaki Yano in the Japanese, Ian Sinclair in English. He's a full-time employee for the curry shop and a friend of Minari's, but he's also, for lack of a better word, kind of a simp for her as well. Like, he's very open that his dream is he wants to run a curry restaurant empire with Minari as his wife. despite the fact Minari has consistently said she doesn't have an interest in him in any way, in the romantic sense at least. And yet almost his entire presence on the show is just basically him thinking about Minari. Like it doesn't approach hashtag nice guy behavior where where he feels he's entitled to her romantic affections, but he does seem to keep projecting onto her what his desires are, and he just doesn't seem to have much of a character beyond that. Like he's and I feel weird saying I don't like him and that I think he slows the show down, because while I was watching that and I was having those thoughts, I also realized, oh wait, Agretsuko season 4 is coming out. Haida is very similar in that regard, in that he's a simp for Retsuko. But I like Haida's character, and I don't know if it's because the nature of Agretsuko as a really exaggerated comedy means I'm willing to be more forgiving of Haida's flaws. It might be because I think they do more interesting things with Haida. Like I guess it's I think one of the greatest sins a character can have in a show is be boring. And I find Nakahara boring, basically. Like the thing he gets most interesting with is his relationship with the character Maki Tachibana, played by Mamiko Noto in the Japanese, Caitlin Barr in the English, who joins up with the restaurant after her brother is responsible for an accident that puts the boss and Minari's replacement in the hospital. And it's revealed that basically her brother is highly controlling of her after their parents' death, and this was mostly just an excuse for her to start living her own life outside of his influence, where she does begin to discover her own talent for writing and her own desires to escape from her brother's control. And that in of itself would have been a really interesting storyline, but then she gets paired up with, not romantically, but just kind of character-wise with Nakahara there. And so she's not around as often as I would have liked to have seen. And she also gets this kind of one-sided thing towards him. Like, it's not a love triangle because Minari is very clear she doesn't have an interest. So you get this, I guess a chain would be a better way of saying it. And basically, I think she would have been a lot more interesting if she was allowed to be a bit more independent, have more interactions with Minari. Because, like, her story sounds interesting. It's the sort of thing, to the extent in which there's a consistent theme across characters. There's a lot of characters who do want to be heard and listened to and respected. And through their experiences in this show, they find ways to sort of start getting that. And I think that's what I'm going to sort of end sort of the stuff on, is this show, it's not a behind-the-scenes production thing like Shirobako or Keep Your Hands Off Izoken or stuff, where they go into really in-depth explanations for how the medium works. There's a little bit of like some of the business side things, mostly to explain to Minari that, yeah, you ain't getting rich off of this thing. But, what it does want to demonstrate is sort of the passion that the people in the field have. I mean, you've got the old Foley experts who come in to help with the show. You've got a writer who's been going at it for decades, and you've got, the young upcoming person. These are people who love radio, and it's about, showing sort of the magic of it and bringing Minari into that world. And I think the best episode that demonstrates that point is the final one, where the radio station sort of has to take over in a moment of crisis. But again, I gotta save some stuff for you to actually watch the show on your own. So what I would say is, if you are a fan of radio as a medium, this, again, it's not a behind the productions thing, but it is still a love letter to the medium enough that I think you would get a value out of it. And even if you're not a fan of radio as a medium, I think if you are interested in that sort of, coming of age, millennial, trying to find their role in life, sort of drama, this is definitely probably on the weirder side of it at times. I still think the best one to that regard that I've watched in the last few years was Sakura Quest, which I have got to do a video on at some point, or not video, a blog on. But it's in that area, and I think it's worth giving a watch. And at the very minimum, even if you don't really want to sit down and watch, if you just want to skip ahead to the radio drama bits or any of the moments where she's on the radio and listen to those alone, I think, are worth the price of admission. The voice performances for them were just beautiful. At least listen to those. Like I said, the very first segment of the show, when you go to the Funimation website or wherever you watch your anime and click on the very first episode, that should give you enough of a sense of whether the show is right for you. But we're now getting into about 25 minutes, almost 24, 25 minutes here. So I'm going to wrap it up with this. Like I said, I think this was a fun experiment on my end. Sort of much more casual thing. So if you do like this style of thing and you don't mind that it would be purely audio, I just do not personally have the time to do video like I was trying to do months ago. And sorry to anybody who was subscribed to my YouTube channel and then saw I disappeared. I went pure blog, so I would highly recommend you jump over to the blog to continue to make sure you're up to date. Follow me on the social medias, the Twitter especially, is where I'm very consistently active about posting things. But if people like this and are fine with it being essentially just a more podcast style, I might look into doing this a bit more often for the reviews, because I like this a little better than just doing blog posts. So let me know what you think about doing this as a more consistent style, and enjoy your holidays, because I will be doing a break next week before the month of December comes and I get buried under Centaur World and Aggretsuko. So thank you all again for listening, and I will see you in the next episode or blog post, whichever comes out.